Hey, I'm Cameron McKenzie. I'm the editor-in-chief over at theserverside.com, and I very quickly want to show you how to Dockerize a Spring Boot 3 application. As you can see, I've got a Spring Boot application here that's not all that interesting. I created in a previous tutorial. All it does is respond to localhost 8080/hello and print out to the browser window, hello Spring World. But it is a Spring Boot 3 application. I want to put this inside of a Docker image and run as a Docker container. So how do I do it? Well, if you're running Gradle, the first thing you'll want to do is run a Gradle build task so that you can build that executable Java jar file that Spring Boot will package your application in. If you're using Maven, it's just a Maven install or a Maven package. Run as Maven install and Eclipse would probably do it. Either way, what's going to happen is you're going to get some files created in Gradle. It's under the build folder of your project. In Maven, it would be under the Walmart folder, under the Target folder, not Walmart. By the way, you might not see that build folder if you're in Eclipse. There's always this filter here, which sometimes is selected for hiding the Gradle folders, the build folder. So make sure that's deselected and you'll be able to see the file. Or you can just go onto the file system and play around with that Spring app jar file. That's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to say show in System Explorer. And if you right click on a folder, say show in System Explorer, well, it'll actually open up a Windows File Explorer window for you and take you right to where you want to go. There's that app jar file that I want to package in a Docker container. To do that, I need to first create a Dockerfile that describes what that Docker image is going to look like. So I create a file called Dockerfile. Then I'm going to edit that with Notepad++. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, I need to run a Java application, that Spring Boot app. I don't want to create a Docker image from scratch that has Java and stuff in it. So I'm just going to start from the eclipse-temurin version Java 17 JDK Alpine distribution of Java. This is a pre-existing image that you can find on Docker Hub that has Java installed and configured already, so I don't have to do that. I've now got an image that already has Java in it. Well, why don't I copy my Java jar file in there, Spring App 1.0.jar, just in case you're wondering where that came from. That's the jar file that Maven or Gradle just built for you with the embedded Tomcat server in it. I'm going to copy that into the Docker image that has the JDK installed, and I can rename the file or I can give it the same name. I'm going to give it the same name, Spring App 1.0.jar. A lot of times that's just named app.jar. That's sort of the convention, but I think it's a bit confusing when you're starting out. Now, what happens if somebody runs this particular image? Well, the entry point, what should happen when someone runs this image is they should call that Java command. They should use the jar switch, and they should run the Spring App 1.0.jar file that I just copied in there. What was the point of copying it into that folder if you're not going to run it? So there we go. That is the basic Docker file. Start off with the Eclipse JDK image, copy your jar file into that image, and then set an entry point that says, hey, if somebody actually tries to start this image, this is what we should do. Run the Java jar Spring App 1.0 jar command and start our application. Now, that's the Docker file. We now need to actually build the image, because if I come into over here, and this is Docker Desktop for Windows, and I look at images, there's nothing there. And if I open up a git bash shell here and type in the Docker images command, well, it's going to say, boo on you, there are no Docker images to speak of. So I need to create a Docker image. I do that by saying Docker build. I'm doing this in the same folder that the Docker file is in. I got to give the Docker image a name. I'll just call it Spring App because I'm boring, and I'll give it a tag latest. And I'm just going to put a dot there that says build a Docker image, call it Spring App, put a tag on it called latest, and the Docker file that describes it is in the current directory. That's what the dot means, right? And so I click enter, and it'll take a few seconds, and looks like it builds that image very quickly. If I do Control L to clear things up here and type in Docker images, boom, it says that there's a Docker image created, and if I go over here, I've got that Docker image created right there as well. So things are running swimmingly. Now, if I wanted to, I could run it. I could say Docker run, and I want to run this on port 80 Wayne Gretzky 8099, and 8099 on my host machine will map to 8080 running inside of the Docker container. That's Tomcat inside the container. So I'm mapping the port used inside the Docker container to a port on the host system. And what is the image that I want to run? Well, it was spring app : latest. And that should run my Spring Boot application. There we go. We get the little Spring message up there. It looks like it's running. Internally, it's running on port 8080. You can see that note right there. But when I try and access this on my host machine, I have to say localhost : 80 Wayne Gretzky /hello, because that was the port mapping that I did. Look, I can click refresh 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. I see the output. And there was also a systemout.println in the code. And so that got printed here onto the terminal window every time I clicked refresh, because it kept doing a console output. Now I'm going to click Control-C to terminate that. But yeah, you can come over here. There it is. Hello Spring World. And that was the little message that kept getting printed out in that window. Now, if you really want to up your game, you can always push this up to Docker Hub. And let me see if I can figure out how to get this up to Docker Hub. Well, I think the first thing you need to do is you need to figure out what your Docker Hub username and password is. So I'm going to go to Docker Hub. I'm already logged in. My name's Cameron MCNZ, but I don't have any image up there called Spring App. So I'm going to try and push this up to my personal repository. So how do we do that? Well, note the name of my personal Docker Hub repo is Cameron MCNZ. So what I have to do is I have to come down here and tag this image, Docker tag. No, actually I need the name of the image, Docker images. So I need to add a tag to image 1B6C49B91D44. I think that's right. 1, 2, 3, yeah, that looks good. So I'm going to tag that, and I'm going to tag it with my name. So Cameron MCNZ /Spring App. And I'll do : latest, why not? So now I'm actually tagging that particular image. And I'm tagging it with the same name as my Docker Hub repository. If I go Docker images now, you can actually see that's tagged there. And the next thing I need to do is I need to log in to Docker Hub. Now, here's the problem. I'm going to go Docker login. It's going to ask me for my username. Well, let me do a Docker logout first. So you can experience the pain here. So now if I haven't logged in, I'll try and do a Docker login. It'll ask me my username, and I'll say Cameron MCNZ. It'll ask me my password, and I'll type in my password, and the problem is I get an error, unauthorized. And to get around this error, what you have to do is you have to go up to Docker Hub and go to your account settings. When you're in your account settings, click on security. And from here, create a new access token. I don't care what you name it. Call it my cool token. Generate the token, and then copy the token, and then come back here to Docker login, provide my name, paste in my credentials, and boom, my login succeeded. Now, with that login succeeded, I can actually push my Docker image up to Docker Hub. All I have to do is say Docker push, Cameron MCNZ /Spring App : latest. Click enter. And now the command window using that Docker command is actually going to push my Docker image up to Docker Hub. And now, if I actually go back to Docker Hub, click on my profile, do a refresh, you can see that indeed that Docker container, that Spring Boot application, has been Dockerized and pushed up to Docker Hub. And now AWS, Fargate, Kubernetes, Linode, whatever it is, can just do a Docker pull on that image name and bring that into their cloud, bring that into their environment, bring that into their Kubernetes cluster, and now anybody can take advantage of my cool Spring app. And there you go. That's how easy it is to Dockerize a Spring Boot 3 application. That's how easy it is to take your Spring Boot jar file and put it in a Docker image and run it as a Docker container. Now, if you enjoyed this tutorial, why don't you head over to the serverside.com. I'm the editor-in-chief over there. We got lots of great tutorials on Docker, Git, GitHub, Spring, Java, Scrum, Agile, Jenkins, you name it. If you're interested in my personal antics, you can always follow me on Twitter at CameronMCNZ and subscribe on the YouTube.